Hey everyone, my name is Vince Rubinetti, and in this video I'm going to be breaking down the soundtrack from the game Hacky Zack. So if you know who I am, it's probably either from Twitter or from the game Ink by Zach Bell. Ink is probably a more popular and well-known title than Hacky Zack, but I decided to do the video on this game over Ink because, well, one, the soundtrack is just longer than Ink's was, and two, Ink was sort of a rush job, and this I had a little bit more time to think about things and do things more deliberately. So yeah, there's just more to talk about in this soundtrack. So that's why I decided to do this one. I may come back and do Ink in the future, but for now we're going to start with this and see if anyone finds it interesting. So yeah, in this video I'm going to be basically going through each track in the game's soundtrack, and we're going to take a look at the layers and the instruments that I used, as well as the effects, and also talk about a little bit about the process of how all the songs are written and the motivation behind certain decisions of certain things that were done. And I know I always like seeing this from other composers when they post this stuff on YouTube. It's unfortunately rare, but maybe that's why I get so excited when I see these things, because I like peeking into the window of other people's creative processes. And I also just enjoy seeing, that's how they got that cool effect, or that's how they got that particular sound, by layering those particular instruments together and then putting those effects on top of each other. So I find that interesting, and hopefully, I'm hoping someone will find this a little bit interesting as well. Okay, so first things first, I guess I'll give a little overview about what the game actually is for anyone who doesn't know, and I'll overlay some footage as I'm talking about this. So the way we describe this game to the press and on the Steam page and all that is it's a 2D precision platformer. So you play as Zack, and you can kick this little ball around. You can kick it in 8 cardinal directions, and you're trying to get the ball to the goal. So normally in platformers, you're trying to get the player to the goal. In this case, you're trying to get the ball to the goal. And that's really the basic gist of the game. There's 6 worlds, and in each world we introduce different behaviors and physics of the balls, and also of elements in the worlds themselves. But that's the basic gist of it. You're trying to get the ball to the goal. So that's what the game is mechanically. Now, thematically, and this is something that probably no one really knows about except the development team, this game is actually a representation of Zack's struggles as an indie developer, both being the developer and also in his interpersonal relationships as he, serves that role as an indie developer. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, and this is one of the things that made working on this project very interesting, because I could also relate to these struggles that he was dealing with, or at least most of them. So for the people who have played the game, each of the world has a little title screen before it starts, and they are in order: isolation, denial, self-destruction / apathy, expectations, manipulation, and then finally acceptance for World 6. So those are all key struggles that he faces as an indie developer, and they also happen to be things that I face as a composer as well, or at least most of them. I probably relate to all of them except maybe manipulation, I guess. But yeah, so I had a very strong connection with this concept. And I found it very interesting that it was such a personal thing, because it's never in your face while you're playing the game. It's always in the background. No one would know about it until, I guess, now that I'm talking about it now, I guess the secret's out. But yeah, it's not in your face. All you get is a little text at the beginning of the world. And another interesting thing was that talking with Zack, all of these gameplay mechanics actually came from the emotional context of those issues first. It wasn't the other way around. So he kind of started with this list of issues that he dealt with and dreamed up mechanics that would represent those in the actual game. So just like a quick example, in World 3, self-destruction and apathy, we have breaking ice blocks, which is a pretty on-the-nose metaphor for being self-destructive and self-destructive tendencies. And I'll try to pepper in these examples, these ties between the theme of each world and the mechanics in that world, because I'll be talking about the emotional context in relation to the music anyway. But that's just like a basic example, and I always thought that was cool that he sort of started in that direction rather than coming up with the mechanics and then sort of fabricating the lore, for lack of a better term, that explained them. So with all that in mind, how do you approach writing this soundtrack? Where do you start? We have all this emotional backstory that the player is never going to notice or know about. And we also have this very mechanically driven gameplay that lends itself both to like trick shot kind of speedrunning style of gameplay, but also lends itself to a puzzle sort of aspect, because each time you kick the ball, the same thing happens. And figuring out how to do certain levels, you can try different strategies, and you can always find one that's sort of the most comfortable, preferred solution to get through it. So the gameplay has that aspect of it as well. So maybe the gut reaction in terms of it being an action platformer is to do something like fast-paced and rock and very energetic. But we decided we wanted to do something a little bit more of a zen quality to it. And this was sort of the same thinking that Zach had for Ink when I first worked with him. He was thinking, I guess, Ink is going to be a really hard platformer, and instead of making the music sort of match that stress of going through each level, instead we're going to have a contrast and actually make it the other direction. We're going to make it very passive and soothing and calming, hopefully, to distract the player from how difficult the game is. And so the first instinct for us was to do the same general thing. I did want to make it a little bit more, have a little bit more energy than Ink, because Ink was very, very mellow and minimal. I did want to do something a little bit more. Ink didn't have very much percussion in it, so I wanted to do a little bit more percussion. And the first thing I brought up with the team was, hey, what if we did a new jazz soundtrack? I don't know if they were familiar with it at the time, but I showed them some examples, and it just seemed like the right fit. It had enough energy to keep it entertaining, but also be soothing and calming enough, and again, be zen-like to sort of complement the chill aspect of the game, hoping the player gets into a flow state of some sort while they're playing, and they don't really notice how difficult the game is or how many times they've been restarting and dying in the level. So overall, that was the first thing that was decided. What genre and what general style is it going to be? And then from there, I just started making demos, diving into each world and trying to figure out a way to represent the theme of that world musically, and also to match the gameplay and the art, which were very, very much keyed into the theme as well. So it all had to work in synergy, and it was sort of my job to mesh into that and sort of complement it and carry it through. So with that, I guess I'll just start opening up these project files and diving in. Okay, so we're going to start with World 1 Isolation. This was the real first track that I wrote for the game. Technically, I wrote the credits theme first, but that was sort of when I was still trying to find the exact style that I wanted, and that's actually the reason why it sounds a little bit different. We're going to go a little bit out of order here. We're going to do World 1 first, and we're going to skip back to the trailer and then the menu music. I wanted to start off with this because this was sort of the first actual thing that I wrote for the game. I don't know, it just feels like the right place to start. So this is the first sort of image that I saw of the game, this beautiful little background here, which is actually Crystal Mountain in Washington. I assume it's in Washington. I don't know if it's in Seattle or not. Yeah, it has to be in Seattle, but this is a mountain that Zach can see, apparently. So that's why the image is in the game. But yeah, this is Isolation, and I always load up a background image of whatever I'm working on. This is just sort of a basic mock-up here. I think that I had to alter it and make it background sized. So I always put the relevant world background before I start working. So let's see. Let's dive right in. So this was the first thing that I wrote for this particular song. And one of the first things I wrote for the game was just this keyboard riff here. And pardon me if I'm like being a little bit awkward with the controls here. I'm used to working with two monitors, but I have to record, I have to put it all on one monitor. So I'll just solo the harp here. And So basic 3-chord structure there, and that repeats throughout like the whole song pretty much, in different forms. And that was the first thing I came up with. I think it looks like I came up with it just on the keyboard, on my MIDI keyboard right in front of my desk here, right in front of me. And you can sort of tell that it looks like a very keyboardy kind of riff. So yeah, I just felt like that it somehow captured the feeling of loneliness and isolation, which again, I'm being honest, I'm very familiar with that, being a composer who works at home for most of the time. And I can't listen to music while I work. Artists can listen to music while they work. I can't because I'm writing music, so it can be very, very lonely sometimes. And yeah, I totally get that. And for whatever reason, these 3 chords just sounded very lonely to me, and it sort of just came fluidly out of the keyboard for me there. What else do we have in this first pattern here? We have this very cool, I really like this actually, and it's not my doing. This is actually one of the few cases where I actually took a preset in a program and just used it straight vanilla with like almost no modification. And it sounded so haunting to me. And we'll go into the next pattern. I just want to show the harp here too. I forgot. This harp is made up of a East-West Quantum Leap. I think it's the orchestra's version of the harp. Yeah, the symphonic orchestra. And then it's also combined with a very, very old VST that it's kind of hard to find. I will be showing these plugins just for the more musically aligned people, just like if they're curious about what plugins I'm using, because I know that's always a question. Let's take a quick look at the effects that are on here, on the harp. So just some basic EQ. Most of this soundtrack effects are just going to be EQ and reverb. It's a lot of that, cutting out some kind of resonance frequency there, it seems. And then we have, oh, I see. Okay, so the play harp was in the foreground, and then this other instrument, which dry sounds like this, pretty crappy. That I was just using as a reverb, like a totally dry or a totally wet signal. And you can kind of hear the attack is lost there. It's very smooth. It's not, you don't hear the plucking kind of sound in there. That's cut off. And that is because in this reverb here, we have like a whooshy sound there, and it sort of imitates that, for lack of a better technical term to use there. It sort of follows that trail there, and that's why it sounds very washy kind of. And then some extra reverb on top of that, EQ, cut off the bottom end of it. Make sure it's not too bassy, mudding the sound up. And then just compressing it a little bit here, which is what that does. Okay, so that's the effects chain on there. I'll try to keep that to a minimum because the effects chains aren't really too interesting, probably, especially to most producers. It's pretty basic, I guess. Just EQ and reverb and a little bit of compression. What else do we have? Yeah, so here's some little things that most people probably won't notice, just a little background. Just a little sparkle here, that's what I called it. And again, that's like some kind of Zeta patch there. And here, we have a very slow piano sound there, which was made in the same basic way as I showed you with that harp reverb. It's sort of, you've heard this effect in movies before where the reverb kind of trails up to the sound itself, and then also, so it's sort of like a, well, I mean, you can see the shape right there. It kind of trails up, but it's just like a very washy sound, kind of. So that is a lead-in into the main beat here. We have a little snap here with some reverb. Some beeps in the background there. which is just some basic sine waves, I think. Okay, I guess let's take a look at some of these loops here that we're using. In this soundtrack, for all the percussion, I used a very particular pack of sound loops. I don't actually know what it's called, but it's all within the same group. It's all from the same company, and I felt that helped keep it a little bit consistent. And the thing is about loops, I usually never just take them at face value. I always like chop them up into something a little bit more interesting or a little bit suited more to the thing that I'm writing. You'll find a lot of people that are against loops and presets and things like that. My opinion on that is whatever is best for the music, that's what you should do, always. Whatever sounds best to you. If that happens to be a preset, then go for it. Probably most of the time, if you're opening your imagination up enough, the preset alone won't usually do it. Like 90% of the time, you'll have to either create your own thing or start with the preset and modify it heavily to get what you really need. But once in a while, chances are, just by probability, the preset is going to be exactly what you need. So there's no shame in using that, I feel. There's no shame as long as what you're creating sounds good, in my opinion. Anyway, so I start with these loops here for the percussion. So let's see here. We have a hi-hat here, I think. Panned a little bit left. Another hi-hat with a broken up rhythm on the right. And then another one. And then like a little brush rhythm that I recorded. So yeah, you can see here, these little green things here are the notes. It's like a zoomed out version, just in case you're confused on what that is. You can sort of see if it was just plain, it would sound like this. Ooh, that's loud. Yeah, so that's what it sounds like on its own. Sorry about the distortion there, because I was only using the hi-hats from that loop, not the snare sounds that were louder. So that's what it would sound like on its own if I didn't chop it up. And same thing with this one. Again, sorry for the loudness, but okay. Moving on. I'll skip forward here a little bit. Yeah, let's take a look at this here. So I have this little swell here. Honestly, I don't even remember how I did this. Let's see. Let's take a look at this. Okay, yeah, this is a very old... I have this very large library of free old plugins, which is, nice to have as long as you know what they all do, kind of, and what they're generally useful for, and don't spend way too much time looking for them. It's good to have a big library like that. Let's see. Okay, yeah, that's that razor pad from before. But yes, let's take a look at the effects that we have on this. Sounds like a low pass filter, or a high pass filter rather. Yeah, so that's what's creating that that sort of falling effect. Is this? It's slowly letting more and more bass frequencies down or in. And then the other things are just like, again, some reverb, some panning here, back and forth, etc. And then we also have a little bass drop in here. Or a bass rise, excuse me. And then, okay, boom, right into the main riff here. So as you can see, that's the same exact riff as the harp. Very lazy, but it as soon as I copied it over, I was like, oh, that sounds really good, and it made sense to me. It sounded very chill, and I just sort of like the sound of it. And then here we go, right with the beat here. And then again, let's take a look here. that's the beat as it is vanilla. And there it is together. Oh. So yeah, I tend to group all these things together. These are all the percussion tracks right here together. So yeah, this is pretty simple. I think you'll notice, and probably other composers and producers might notice too, I tend to have a very minimal approach to production, at least in terms of how many layers I use. I've seen other producers like Andrew Aversa, Zircon, amazing producer. His songs sound really, really polished and professional, but he uses a lot of layers. Like he would probably use 4 times the amount of layers, maybe even 5 times the amount of layers that I would here. What I tend to do is I try to keep the layers as minimal as possible to like the basic core. You know, I try to, a lot of producers will layer things on top of each other so much, like, you know, you'll take a harp from here, like how I had these 2 harps here. Another producer might take, you know, different harp sample library, like 3 different sample harp libraries, or 4 or 5, and layer them all together and put different effects on each of them. Whereas here I only have 2, and it's a stylistic approach too. But I try to find whatever is the core, like necessary instruments or the sample libraries, whichever ones sound the best and are contributing the most to the sound, the combined sound, and then just trim the fat away basically. Like the same thing when I'm coming up with snare sounds and kick sounds. I'll start with like 5 different kick samples and 5 different snare samples as well. And then I'll go through each of them and figure out which ones sound the best together and which ones don't really add too much to the sound that I'm wanting to get, and then just cut them down to like 3 or sometimes 2. So that's just a personal approach. Okay, so moving on. Oh, and by the way, here's a... I like that effect particularly. Just some guy going, ah. And I think I got that actually from the Mario Party soundtrack. I was able to rip all the sound effects. I don't think it was recorded by Yasunori Mitsuda, who did the music for the Mario Party. I think that's like one of those old licensed or keyboard sounds or something. But wherever it came from, I love it. So yeah, we start here with the beat. Give you a little peek at the bass here. That's the little effect here that starts out the sort of pitching it down, adding a bunch of echoes. So that's where the main beat starts, and then the next phrase that we go into is this razor pad that I was talking about before, the one that I love that sounds very haunting and hollow, is again, it's those same 3 chords that the harp was playing, except instead of being arpeggiated up, they start all the notes start at the same time, as you can sort of see there. And the result is this really haunting, just hollow, lonely feeling. And that's probably my favorite part of the track, just that simple fact of having those chords and that pad. Okay. Yeah, so I remember it's actually raining outside right now as I'm recording this. I don't know if you can hear it pitter-pattering against the window. But it sort of reminds me that I do remember this distinctly, that it was raining as I was writing this melody and the first part of this song. Like, it was a very rainy day. This soundtrack, by the way, if you do feel like listening to it, listen to it on a rainy day, because it just really, for whatever reason, it fits very nicely with the rain. So yeah, and this melody sort of just, again, I have to say, just came sort of naturally, and I know that's not very helpful for anyone looking to learn about melody writing, but yeah, it just, once you have this beats and all these backing instruments, which have been copied from the previous phrases pretty much exactly. Once you have that, and you have the instrument that you know you want to use, the piano, in this case I knew I wanted to... I knew I wanted like a high-pitched piano with an echo. Once I had that all set up, it was really just a matter of just sort of like almost closing my eyes kind of and just letting it come out. And, you know, there was some modification to it after. It didn't come out perfectly, you know, but the general framework of this melody here came out instantly, and then just sort of modified it and iterated on it until I was happy with it. Then in the next pattern here, let's see if there's anything interesting. Yeah, so the Mellotron whistle. Let's see where I got this from. Yeah, I think this is just part of my sample collection, I should say. And again, just some delay, some basic echo and EQ. Second pattern here of this melody, you can see I'm doubling it with this. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, so this is an Omnisphere. If you don't know what Omnisphere is, it's a great plugin. You can load it. They have these great samples that come with it, but then you can modify them to your heart's content and make these really interesting sounds. Really interesting sounds. So it looks like this is something custom that I just cooked up. It's a basic square pad. And you can see here, it's mirroring the melody on the piano. Something somewhat interesting is that you see where my mouse is here, the pitch is wavering slightly at key points as I'm stupidly talking over it. So you could sort of see it there. I was zooming in on it a little bit. Just add some like, sort of like a wail, you know, a wailing kind of thing, a whale call. Just, you know, call of loneliness. Oop, and it is starting to thunder. Wow, crap. Hopefully that is not a problem for you guys, but it certainly does fit the mood here. All right, so let's move on here. And again, these kind of phrases do seem to come very naturally to me. Yeah, these very basic arpeggiating kind of rhythmic things. Those are my bread and butter. And so now we have the breakdown section. You will notice if you look at all of the sounds, or all the songs in the soundtrack have the same basic structure, and this is very much on purpose. The first 2 minutes of it, and I can show you here, this is just a track layout of like, these are the pattern. They're called patterns, but they're just, you can think of them as phrases, or, you know, if you have no musical background, you can think of them as sentences, I guess, kind of. And I arranged them all here in order, which is really not how you're supposed to use this program, but I sort of do it in that way anyway, because that's the way I always did it. I arrange things as songs. You can also arrange them as sort of layers, like you can have your bass part here and repeat the bass part, and then layer your snare drum part on top of it, like that. but instead I just do it all as cohesive, all the instruments together in one sentence, all the instruments together in another sentence, and so on. So yeah, you'll notice that all the songs have the same basic layout, and that is for the first roughly 2 minutes or so, you have like the first part, which is establishing the melody and some variations. And then from the 2 minute mark to the 3 minute mark is sort of like a breakdown section, for the lack of a better term, where the percussion drops out and it becomes a little bit more mellow. So that's what's starting here. Oh, sorry, I moved to the wrong spot. So it's more melody, more mellow, and the percussion is sort of dropped out, from a snare and a kick, and now it's just hi-hat and shaker and a little snap, and then it'll drop down even further. So that's the sort of interlude part of each piece, and then around minute mark 3, it ramps back up with the full percussion into a variation on the first melodies and themes established in the first half of the song. And then it closes with, obviously, a loop to the beginning, which is also a little bit of a denouement, or whatever you call it. A little trough, I guess, in the energy. If you were thinking about it as an energy graph over time, it starts low, ramps up, then drops low for like in the middle section, ramps back up, and then drops back down for the end. And wow, there's some lightning here, and we might get some thunder, guys. Just giving you a heads up. All right. Yep, there it is. Okay. Oh dear, I'm going to die. All right. So yeah, you'll notice that in every single song. Every one of the world songs anyway. Not really in the trailer or the menu, but just for World 1 through 6, and then not for the credits as well either. So, but that's the basic structure that I went with, and I did this to sort of, I think you need the interlude in there to keep the percussion from getting too repetitive and too grating, and just to break up the song a little bit, break up the energy of the song. But the trick is you want to give the ear a break a little bit, but you also don't want to bring the song to a grinding halt either. So you have to sort of keep something going, right? And the way I usually did this in this soundtrack anyway was to drop out the snare and the bass. The kick drum, that is. And then again, we're going here with these little arpeggiated parts that I love so much. A little chord change. By the way, you can see as I'm clicking these little green circles on the left here, that's me muting and unmuting the specific layers, instrument layers. So if you want to know exactly which layers are active, you can just look closely at the green parts there. And then, of course, this vertical line here is the position in the song. And then, I believe this is it. Yep, right back into the beat, but this time with a variation on it, having this. Again, a very basic arpeggiated melody. And then back again with the piano lead, except this time a different melody from what it was before. Melody first time was where was it? Here. And then the next time it was... And then from here, we get a little key change that sort of ramps up the emotional drive of the song up into a little bit of a climax here. And finally, and then that is it, pretty much. And it just loops right back to the beginning with the harp. And boom, there it is, World 1, Isolation. Okay, so here's the trailer music. And I'm not going to talk too much about this one, really. I think the emotional core and the meat of the soundtrack is really in the world music. But I'll still go through the layers of this one and break it down so you can see it a little bit. I guess I won't talk as much about it going through. Okay, here we go. So it starts off with this reverse that I'll talk about. And this reverse... I called it old-fashioned playtime. I think it was me that came up with that name. I don't think it was from a preset. I don't know why it's just sounded like that. And here I'm going to the very end of past the end of the song to a pattern where I actually constructed that effect. And it was with this little Haunted Flutes preset in Alchemy, an old plugin that's now defunct, actually. They don't make it anymore. They don't sell it. So it's a little flute thing. Again, there's those arpeggios that I love so much. And they have a lot of delay on them at the end. And I think you can probably kind of hear it right as it ends there. I started to record the trail of it, what they call the tail, the reverb tail, or the delay tail, or the echo tail, whatever. And right here, hopefully that sounds familiar. I just took that and then I reversed it and put it in, panned it left and right. I don't know what the difference is between the left and the right channel. I think one is like a couple of beats off or something like that. So yeah, that combined with the shadow swell. This is again like another backwards swelly. Is it ever going to play? No. What is it doing? I don't know. This is sort of another backwards swelling. There it is. One day I made this like backwards effect with, like I already went over with the piano in World 1. The reverse reverb, the delay and all that. And I just went through like every instrument that I can think of, or a lot of them anyway. Shadow. You can see here I have like shadow swell piano, shadow swell sitar. I just sat down and like just recorded a bunch of them with that same effect, and then I used that several places in the soundtrack. Okay. So yeah, that combines for the reverse, and then when we go into the main section we get this. And that is a very bright, plucky harp combined with a plucked piano sample library from Spitfire. Then we go into this here. And I'll play the bass just for context for the melody. Again, another arpeggio with a lot of delay and reverb. we'll take a look at the drum beat here. That's how I've chopped it up. But originally it sounds like this. So that's how the loop comes on its own. And there's another layer to it of just like ride and hi-hat. And then, yeah, that's how I've chopped it up there. And then, let's see what we have here. Oh, that's just a supplement for the kick. And then we have a little ride cymbal here. Oh, almost forgot. Can't forget this. So, Sandy Gordon, our pixel artist for the project, his wife, at the time, they were living in Japan, and his wife taught, I guess, kindergarten, the equivalent of kindergarten or elementary school, and she got one of her students to say Hacky Zack into her phone mic. So here's that. It's split up and sort of hidden in the soundtrack. First I'll show it to you without the effects on it.
Hacky Zack.
So those are the 3 samples there.
Hacky Zack.
I split them up so I could put them into a rhythm here. You can sort of see these are the 3 notes. Hacky Zack, but they have to be offset to the left because I end up adding an effect, another backwardsy, echoey kind of effect here to get this kind of effect. One, 2. Yeah, so it starts on the 1, Hacky Zack, but it ends up coming out, or the attack of it sort of, even though there's a build up to the attack happens on the 3. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I was kind of counting double time there. Anyway, yeah, so that's, again, that's like a backwardsy delay effect, sort of similar to the piano one that I said before. We have a white noise convolution reverb here with a volume ramp up and another delay just for effect. And that what that ends up doing is it sort of sounds like it's coming in reverse. Ooh, sorry about the volume. But yeah, so I thought that was pretty obvious in the forefront, but obviously it was stupid of me to think that because I'm the creator. Of course, it's gonna be obvious to me. I put it in there. So when I told the team about this like a week or a month after the game release, they were kind of surprised to hear it there. I think Alejandro from the team described it as like a little whisper in your ear. So I guess that's like a little bit of an Easter egg there. A little Japanese boy saying Hacky Zack. And that also pops up 1 or 2 maybe other places in the soundtrack as well, which I'll keep secret and let you guys find. Okay. Another layer we have here. Just a subdued piano. And again, this is kind of somewhat simple. That's an omnisphere pad there. And we have a little can barely hear that, but yeah. And then we have the main melody. And that is the same, if it wasn't obvious, the same instrument as from this little sweep up here in the beginning. I'm reusing that same instrument. That's sort of what I was alluding to when I was talking about the minimalism of layers. Maybe some other producers, and I'm not saying this is wrong, right or wrong, some other producers would have possibly used a different sample library or virtual instrument or plugin for this part, and then used yet a different one again for this part as well. But as much as possible, I like to keep the amount of instruments to a minimum and then try to, in later sections in the song, try to use the same instruments that I've already incorporated and introduced into the song in a different way, in sort of a more interesting way, I guess, rather than, well, whenever I need to create a new part, I automatically add a new instrument. I like to reuse the same instruments that I've already introduced before, if that kind of makes sense. I don't want to sort of build up like a triangle pyramid, just adding more and more layers every time I need to add a new part, kind of. I like to go back to the same instruments, but with playing different melodies and different harmonies and all that. And then I'm not gonna like play through all these, just straight through, because you can go listen to the soundtrack on your own, not Bandcamp. So here's the climax of the piece. And again, little accents there with the E piano. Oh, and this is the E piano plugin that I use for the whole soundtrack. This appears several places. This is some old Steinberg plugin that again doesn't exist anymore. I had to like find it in the black internet or whatever, the black market. You have to download it somewhere because they don't sell it anymore. So yeah, and then it just ends with, oh, that's right, you can sort of hear these alpha beeps layer here at the end. Oh yeah, and this little mechanical sounding thing is actually just the Zack part of Hacky Zack starting at this pitch and rising up. So over that amount of time. That's all that is. And it just happens to sound like a motor or something. Okay, so that is like I was saying, I tend to put things that I don't use, scrap materials, scrap parts that I don't end up using at the end, past the end of the song, in empty patterns. Or again, patterns is the FL Studio, the program that I use, is term for that. You can just think of it as I don't know, phrases or sentences. But I put the unused stuff at the end here, and I guess I can take a look at this. So that was clearly supposed to fit in there somewhere, and I decided it just wasn't necessary or didn't really fit in. I don't know exactly which part that was intended to go in, but yeah. So maybe that's something interesting to show for all these pieces as well. All right, so that's the trailer music. I guess onto the menu music. Alrighty, here we have the menu music, and you'll notice right away that this starts off in the same way as the trailer music starts off with that same reverse that I talked about. The old-fashioned playtime, as I called it. But then instead of going into, whatever key that was, it sort of fakes you out, like, oh, is this going to be the same exact thing again? But instead of, the first 6 seconds are the same, and instead of going into the key that it did before in the trailer, instead it goes into a different key. And then here we have the start of this. And here again we have a lot of the same instruments. We have this old sound iron plug-in here for the guitar, which I'm not sure if that's based on an old Hans Zimmer guitars from the Spectrasonics, that really old library. It sort of sounds like it, but maybe not. So you got some block chords there. take a look at the percussion. There's my chop up of it. Let's see what it sounds like without being chopped. Yep, so it sounds very different. And yeah, this one is pretty short, so there's not too much to talk about here. And here's sort of an out of character for the soundtrack. This is I didn't really use this type of style or instrument anywhere else in the soundtrack, but I don't know, it still felt right, so it was an exception to the rule, I guess. It's just a guitar with like a wah-wah filter on it. That's all. And that's it for that one. That one's pretty short. That was written fairly quickly. Whoa. I don't know what that is. That was again, one of those scrap patterns. All right, so that's it for the menu, and we'll continue on with Denial. Okay, here we have Denial. I didn't talk too much about the emotional content of last one, or the emotional meaning rather, of Isolation, because I sort of thought it was self-explanatory enough. You know, being alone as a composer or an indie developer, you spend a lot of your time doing your work alone, not interacting with a lot of people. So for this one, Denial was supposed to represent sort of ignoring your problems, not really being denied by other people, but ignoring your own problems and the things that are looming above your head, and sort of trying to pretend that they don't exist, basically. And you'll see here that the background is a bunch of eyes staring at you, and that was sort of to represent the feeling of constantly being watched and your problems looming over your head, and you just trying to ignore that they're not just staring you right in the face. So I have to admit, this is probably the weakest track on the soundtrack. I struggled with this one to find a musical representation of that idea of, oh, la da da, everything's fine, la la la, I'm not listening to you problems. I had a tough time figuring out a way to convey that through music. The way I ended up settling on was sort of this switch between major and minor in the same key. So you'll hear that in a couple spots here. So what we started off with was just the same E piano again here, the same E piano instrument. And I keep forgetting to turn the volume down. I'm sorry. So, you know, this is in C, and you can see here that it's going between minor and major. And there's a few other places that I'll point out that happens throughout the song. Here we have what I called a windy pad, which is an omnisphere patch. And it looks like it's just one instrument combining this bow limba sample here and this Russian flute. With just a little bit of echo and reverb on it. And the bow, let's hear what the bow limba sounds like on its own. So there you're getting the tone of it, right? You're getting the actual note. And you can see the spectrum here of what's going on. You're getting those mid frequencies. And then if we go to the flute part of the instrument, we're getting all this breathy highs here that make it sound like a flute. And together, they create a nice little pad. Nice little pad instrument. Here we have a nice little part of an absinthe preset that I recorded and then sort of played in a rhythmic way and panned back and forth here. And another kind of screechy sound from absinthe. The absinthe plugin is very intensive, so I just sort of messed with the preset or possibly randomly generated or messed around with creating my own, and then just recorded it and then discarded of the plugin, so it wouldn't take up the system resources. So yeah, and then we go into the second pattern here, and here's one of the major instruments that I use in this is just a little flute, and that is actually a separate sample on its own. Again, with a lot of echo and stuff on it. Yeah. And then here we come in with the percussion. And we have a little celesta. Then we have the next pattern, where we, if you can sort of hear it, we have these strings come in at the top, these high strings. And something you'll notice me do a lot is that I'll repeat patterns in twos, kind of, and then the second time of each, I'll add another instrument to sort of create this sense of rising and adding and building. So we have this pattern, for example, and then this pretty much all the same instruments, all the instruments stay the same, and then we just add more on top of this string layer for the second time around. And then that's the transition to what's going to be the main beat. You'll see in a second. But let's take a quick look at this pad here. This is again another Omnisphere. Wonderful samples in Omnisphere. This is just combining some of the Hammond samples that they have. And again, adding some effects on it to make it sound a little bit better. And what we end up with is just what I call a Hammond pad, and we'll get into where that's used a little bit more after the main beat comes in. There's the flute again. So in the beginning we were using it in the higher register. And again, this is just a single sample that's being pitched down. You know, normally, like for example, in this Celesta thing here, I'm using an actual sample library, which is, you know, it's not using the same sample for every single note. You know, every note is its own sample. In fact, every note has multiple samples because they sample it very loud and then very soft. Well, this one isn't. So if you press it lower down in the key, it's softer. So they sample it at all those different velocity ranges, so you get a more realistic performance when you're playing it out. But this one, yeah, it's just one sample, and it's purposefully lo-fi like that, you know, in a typical new jazz way, but also in a typical like video game kind of soundtrack way, where it's almost purposefully lo-fi, yeah. And then, so that's in the higher register, and then when we get to this part, we're using that same instrument again. Instead of creating another plugin and another layer, we're using the same layer but in a little bit different way. Here's the beat. Oh, and here's a case of where I've layered a bunch of samples together for the snare and the kick. Those are all like different. Oh, those are duplicates, huh? That's weird. Oh, I know why that is. Anyway, and those are the 3 different snare samples. And I think, as I mentioned before, I might have started out with 6, 7, maybe even 8 different snare samples and then whittled them down to this as the core 3. And then together they sound like that. So as much as possible, I was trying to convey the sense of pressure, kind of, and also a switching back and forth between major and minor to sort of represent going back and forth between the emotional states of everything's all right, everything's fine, and then, oh no, everything is not fine, everything is crashing down. I don't think I mentioned before, that is the reason for the switching between the minor and the major, like almost switching back and forth between happy and sad. That was the closest analog that I could find that really conveyed that. But then elsewhere in the song, where we're not using that method, just trying to convey a sense of pressure here, and like these sort of dense sounding chords and overtones from the Hammond organ, which are somewhat complex of a sound already. And just a lurking kind of pressure there. And we have the vibraphone melody here. And that sort of just came out of the beat, really. We have a very subtle thing in the background, and that layer will pop up. This is actually a very interesting plugin. It's called AutoGun. It's a light version of the OGun plugin. Just has these very weird bell and string and percussive sounds to it. Very, very unique sounding plugin. And I'll point that out when we come back to it, when it pops up. But here's another example of like, I like to pepper this in before it actually makes its actual appearance later on. And then I feel like it makes a little bit more sense sort of easing into it a little bit more than just having it show up randomly. Like, hey, here's me, a new character. It's almost like a new character in some background shots before they actually get introduced in the series. I don't know. Maybe it sounds dumb in the context of TV, but it makes sense to me in the context of music. Let's skip ahead here. Oh yeah, and here it is. Here's its real appearance. And then there we go. Minor. Major. And some block chords with the vibraphone. And here's the interlude section. Not much interesting going on here. Oh, we have some of these little flourishes here. Again with that AutoGun instrument, which I could only best describe as like some kind of ethereal bell. I just left it as AutoGun here, which is the name of the plugin, but if I had to name it, I would name it Alien Bell, maybe. I don't know. Here's some kind of weird chords, honestly. And then we try to transition back into something that will bring us back to the main melody again. Let's take a look at the string layer here. Yep, here we go. Here's just a combination of some Omnisphere patches, most likely with some modifications. I won't dive into it now, though. Oh, what do we have here? Ah, yes. That's just the bold limba sound from Omnisphere taken out so I could modify it without having to modify it within the Omnisphere editor. And then here comes the beat. Transitioning back into the out of the interlude and back into the main melody again. Or the main phrase, I guess. And then here's the climax. And we have this little counter melody there. And then going back down to that low part there on the E piano. Goes right back into that beginning part. Loops right back into the beginning of the song. That starts with the low E piano. Now let's see, any scrap material? Oh. Yeah, you can sort of tell that was a scrap for the very end part there, like an alternative melody at the climax there. And we did use that. And there's just like some kind of chord progression that I didn't end up using. Yep, and again there. Yeah, a little, so that again, another scrap thing that I didn't use. Maybe a little bit too tense, that's probably why I didn't use that anywhere. So my process is a lot of the time, you know, starting with a few key ideas, like in the case of World 1 Isolation, that harp riff on the keyboard, and then developing ideas that are similar to that and sort of finding a way to string them together in a fluid way. But yeah, it's mostly about, for me, finding a bunch of related ideas that sound like they're a part of a whole. And it's usually fairly apparent where they're going to go in the song to me. Like after I write them, like I'll work on this whole pattern right here. And get the basic framework of that down in a couple of minutes. And then once I do that, it'll usually become clear whether it's going to make it into the song or not, and also where it's going to go generally. Like, oh, this sounds to me like a part of the interlude, or oh, this sounds like it should come right before the climax of the song. But But of course, I'll always save things at the end here just in case I change my mind. Oh, a lot of scrap. Yeah, a lot of scrap things in this one, I guess most likely because it was one that I struggled with and I probably tried a lot of ideas and went through a lot of iterations. There's that major or minor to major again. Alternative bass line. And that's it for that one, really. There you have it. Denial, folks. Next up will be self-destruction and apathy. Okay, so here we have self-destruction and apathy, World 3. And the first thing to note about this is that I really wanted a minimal production aspect to this. I think this project has the least amount of layers out of all the world musics. And it was really just trying to capture that sense of, oh, I don't care, the apathy. I just don't care. However you could manifest that in music, of just a feeling of laziness and whatever happens, happens, kind of. So that was the apathy aspect of it. And then the self-destruction aspect of it, I tried to sort of capture with a grittiness and distortion effect a lot of the time. So you'll hear that in a lot of the synths, just a very distorted production style with minimal layers and also somewhat of a minimal composition as well, too. Although I'll have to reevaluate that as I go through this here because I don't remember the whole composition off the top of my head. Okay, so first off, I'm going to forget to turn the volume down again. So this is actually kind of interesting, I guess. This instrument here, what that is me holding down an E sus2 chord, I think. Yeah, it says it right there. An E sus2 chord on a acoustic guitar that I had in my studio at the time, and hitting the body of it while holding that chord, hitting the body of the guitar with a soft cotton mallet, and then chopping off the attack of it. So normally you would see like a giant spike here before this, but instead I cut it off after that, or I cut off, I extracted just the tail end of that to use as this instrument. And I recorded a bunch of different ones here, as you can see. And those are all the cut off tails of hitting the guitar. And then we get to the one that I used. And then when I heard that, I dragged it into the main work area here in the DAW, and this just sort of came out naturally. Again, a lot of these melodies for me, they come when you have an interesting sound. So it just sort of came out naturally just by hearing that sound. And obviously very simple composition wise, just the one and the third, the minor third, that's it. And somehow to me that just captured the sort of nihilism maybe that's sort of associated with apathy sometimes. Of nothing matters. Who cares? But yeah, so that came out of just hitting a guitar. And yeah, that's all from the same recording session there. So yeah, that's as simple as it is. It's right there. It starts off just with that, and this other little metal instrument here from an old synthesizer just to keep some sort of rhythm in the background and not to have it just be that, of course. And then the bass comes in with this flute loop here. Flute loop. And that is just simply, I can't remember if that's, I don't exactly remember where that came from, to be honest with you, but I heard it in my library, it fit, I put it in, it was just the right fit for it. And then here we have the drums coming in with a low pass filter on it. I'll just play the drums. Let's see, where do we have this here? There we go. Actually, let me put the hi-hat in as well. So all the instruments playing right now, the kick, snare, and the hi-hat are being filtered in this manner. It's cutting out the lows and the highs, and then there you go. It when it goes into the transition into the main beat, it filters that stuff. The filters become released, and you get the full sound again. So there's the main beat, and once again we have this. Oh, it's not the same e-piano. This is a small free plugin by Yuhi, however you say that, and that is a little e-piano sound. Again with a lot of reverb and echo. I added a choir here because I think it somehow fit with the abyss sort of the background and the shadow Zack in the background there. It sort of conveyed a sense of being trapped, I felt. Bringing back that just for a little bit in the beginning of the phrase there. Okay. All right, so here's the probably the more interesting part of this song, production-wise. So let's take a look at the construction of this sound here. So these are some very heavily modified samples and some preset patches as well, but I think if you were to load these from scratch, they don't sound anything like it. So this is 4 layers here, I believe. So let's take a look at the first instrument, layer A of instrument 1, basically. And that is a looped guitar sound with a lot of distortion on it, like I was saying. This is run through a very high distortion amp here to get that very broken sound. And you can see here I call this the broken lead instrument. So let's listen to layer B of instrument 1. And here we're using a sample called Frippy, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, is a reference to Robert Fripp, the guitarist from King Crimson. Great band. If you don't know about them, check them out. Very old band. Very I guess they're a cult band. Yeah, they're a cult band for sure. They have a cult following. Here's layer A of instrument 2. And again, I can't really go into incredible detail of how I constructed these because it would just take too long. but I'm just showing you I guess sort of the work that goes into it. I mean, I could have quite possibly spent 4 hours just constructing this one synth. I don't keep logs of it down to that detail, but yeah, it's totally possible. Here's layer B of instrument 2. And this is a sample, I believe. They created this by like bowing a light bulb or something. Forget. Actually, I might be able to see. Created by recording a tiny noise that was produced by the light dimmer when turned up and down. Interesting. So some kind of circuit sound to dealing with the light bulb itself. That's so weird how they've created these sounds. Anyway, so all of those together. Oh man. Create just a very, very broken and like it sounds like a broken soul to me, I guess, kind of. And you have this glide feature on, so it's not, if I turn this off. Actually, you can't hear it too well because there's so much echo on it anyway. But what this glide is doing is just it's gliding between each note. And I felt that sort of represents, and maybe this is a little bit of a stretch, but like it does kind of feel like someone gliding through life, kind of, which is an idea related to an idea of empathy to me. Just not caring, just going through the motions. It felt fluid and sort of path of least resistance, just to do whatever, and that all was wrapped up in the idea of apathy for me. So yeah, that's probably the most interesting production-wise thing about this song here, is that one synth. And here we have a taiko drum in the background here. I believe that is a combination of like several different taiko sounds that are just merged into one sample for the heck of it, for the ease of it. Ah, yes. The old piano. I love this. I actually love this this instrument here. This is a free instrument from some website, and what it is it's someone's grandfather's piano that they sampled in their basement, and it's all out of tune and stuff. Like you can hear it. It just sounds like broken. It's out of tune. And I don't think there's really that much effects on it. It's just naturally that dirty and broken the way it was sampled, and I just loved it as soon as I heard it, and I knew it had to go in this song. In fact, later on, it's only a few patterns away. I'll just skip to it. So this was actually the first idea that I scrapbooked down for this song, and I remember that clearly because... That was the first idea that I wrote down for this particular song, and I knew it had to go in this one because it just felt so broken and dejected. And you can hear all like the little noise. That's not me creaking in my seat. That's actually just recorded in the samples, which I kind of like for this particular purpose. Anyway, moving back just a little bit. That's the first appearance of this particular piano. Go into the interlude section. Again, you can see here just by looking at the green notes here, there's not much complicated harmony or anything, or just not a lot going on. It's very, very simplified. And we still have the rolling thunder going on here, so that's continuing. Okay, so the interlude. So here's the echoey E piano again, but instead of using it in a arpeggiated way that we were using it before, instead of doing that stuff, this time, just holding down block chords for the interlude. Then we have a little choir breakdown here. And then we get to this piano part that I had jumped ahead to before. Razor blades all shine. Huh. I don't know where I got that from. And then, yeah, here we go back into the main beat of the song again. Little E piano echo, this time higher in the register. And then here we go into the climax, where we have a variation, a new melody with a broken lead. And then, probably my favorite part of the song, we go into this melody with the grandfather piano. Again, all the other instruments just holding down the fort, playing what they were continually playing before. Choir just holding down a simple chord. And then the next pattern, mirroring the grandfather piano melody with the broken lead. Maybe, it kind of gets lost in the wash there, but it's there. It adds to the tension, the rising tension of the song. And the conclusion. And the final pattern. And then there we have it. And then it loops right back into the first pattern again. Yep. So there is Self-Destruction Apathy. Let's see if there's any scrap that is interesting. It doesn't really look like it. Just some crap. Yep. All right, there you have it, folks. And on to Expectations World 4. Okay, so here we have Expectations, and this is one of my favorite tracks in the soundtrack, and also one of my favorite worlds in the game, just mechanically, because it has two of my favorite mechanics in the game, which is the portals and a slow down time ball. So, I promised I would be tying in the mechanics to the themes of the world. I've been a little bit lax on that so far. So in this world, the portals sort of represent people needing you to be in two places at once. And the time ball obviously sort of reflects the pressures of time and wanting things to slow down a little bit for just a second so you can take a breather. And the time ball in the game itself really allows you to do some interesting movements because you have more time to get around and affect the ball and kick it in the directions that you want. So musically, how do you convey expectations? Well, if you look in the background here, we have staircases, and Felipe Martins, the concept artist for this, did this because I was talking to him about this, and he said that he felt that it represented the ever climbing expectations that people have of you, and that you have to keep climbing these endless staircases to meet their higher and higher rising expectations. So I thought a good way to reflect that in the music was to use a shepherd's tone. So if you don't know what a shepherd's tone is, it is basically the barbershop equivalent, the barbershop pole equivalent in music. So what I actually did to do this was I started with this image. I had to make this image in Paint or Photoshop or whatever, and I had to make sure it looped, it was seamless from left to right and top to bottom. And what I did was I loaded it into a plugin that can read the image file and turn it into tones. Oh boy, I forgot about this. We'll just ignore that for now. So basically what it does is it reads from left to right, and so the time is on the x-axis, and the pitch is on the y-axis. And anywhere where it finds color, anything other than black, it'll put a tone there. So basically, what we get is this. Here's the shepherd's tone layer of this song, and I'll also give you a spectrum view to show you what it looks like. So if I just let this play, you only get to hear a few seconds of it when the song first starts. So if I let this play, well, okay, it fades out. But you can hear that it keeps rising. It never stops rising. So, and you can sort of see that in the spectrum view here. You're getting these tones that are constantly rising and sort of looping back in. And what's really happening is they're fading in from the bottom seamlessly, kind of, and fading out at the top as they rise. But yeah, so I had to create that image to get that particular effect. And I guess let's take a look at the effects that were on it as well. So this was just to filter out some of the frequencies that I didn't want, just to make it like a smoother drop off. Some reverb, some extra EQ here. And then this was without this. So this actually octaved it up and added another octave here. I'll turn it off, and so that's just the pure source material there. And then once I turn it on, it's actually pitch shifting it up several octaves and adding that to the original source. It's not taking it away and pitching it up. It's pitching it up and duplicating it, basically. So you just get a fuller, wider range on there. So that is the shepherd's tone, and that's how the song starts off. You don't necessarily get a great chance to hear it fully, never-ending rising, but at the end, it fades back in, and getting that to loop seamlessly with the start was a little bit tricky, but that's sort of boring, so I won't go into that. All right, so yeah, that's how the song starts. And then while the shepherd's tone is rising, we get this, again, that shadow swell collection of samples that I made. A little sample that I somehow made. Let's see. Did I make that from an image? I may have. There's a cool thing you can do. There's software that you can use, like that plugin that I just showed you, but there's other software as well that will create sound from images. And if you can look at the spectrum view here, it's quite possible that I loaded in some kind of cool background that I had that looked like waves and then modified it and filtered it out and stuff. But you can sort of see the geometry there. So that's maybe where it came from. Anyway, so that's just some little pads and reverses leading up into the main melody, which was the first thing I wrote for this piece, which goes like this. And there you go. That was another thing that sort of probably came out on the piano, and then I modified to make it at least somewhat playable on the actual guitar. So if I open up this plugin here, this is a great plugin maker, by the way, Orange Tree Samples. This is their strawberry guitar, and I'll even show you the fret positions. Now, if I play this, you notice that the fingering of this is kind of weird. Like, you wouldn't actually play like that. There is a place where you can set where you want the preferred fretting position on the neck to be. And if I actually move it up, let's see. You can sort of hear the timbre of the sound does change. See, it becomes very bright and harsh. But that's more close to what an actual guitar player would finger it as, because those frets are at least closer together on the neck. It still might be pretty hard, actually, but it's at least somewhat possible. But I found that it didn't sound good there. At least the timbre of the samples that I was getting. So even though the internal fingering that it's doing in the plugin is not realistic, it's still possible. So yeah, I just kept it that for the sake of the sound, the overall sound. So when that part starts, we also start with some cymbal hits here, and those are just some really old cymbals that I had like in a back room somewhere at my parents' house long ago, that I just sampled me hitting with like a little crappy mallet, and then just some pads underneath here. Just to sort of hold it down a little bit. And then after that part, here comes the percussive loops again, along with these heaven keys that I called them. And this is that auto gun plugin again, that I believe was in Denial. And again, some echo there. And together with everything else, you can sort of barely hear it. But you can sort of hear that echo of it as a little faint whisper. And let's take a look at this here. We have a little rise into the next section. And then that leads into this part. Here's the bass part. Here's the heaven keys again. Doing a little bit denser of a chord version that they were doing before, as you can see between the two patterns. Just adding a little bit more harmony, that's all. And then here we come in with the music boxes. So this pattern is in, let's see, it's in 6/4 and then 5/4. It alternates between 6 and 5 basically. So it's 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5. And FL Studio doesn't allow you to change grids like that So I just left it at 4-4. So these grid lines don't actually line up, unfortunately. So it's a little bit harder to see, but yeah. So we have that little music box melody, and then on the right that's panned left, hard left, and then on the right we have the same exact thing, except it's offset by, looks like, 3/8 notes. So what we end up getting is this interesting sort of stair-step effect, almost similar to a barbershop. I mean, it's sort of the same thing going on there. You know, it's a rising sequence followed by another rising sequence offset by some time. So it's sort of similar there. Then the next pattern, we just have some pads adding to it. And here into the first melody of the song, played on dulcimers. So here we have that very old plugin again for one of them, and I'm also layering it with this other more modern cinematique hammered dulcimer sampled instrument. So that's what's panned on the left. And then together. Right. And then let's see what we have as far as effects. We have this distortion effect. That's right. I ran this through a guitar rig, which is supposed to be for guitars, obviously. And yeah, I ran it through guitar amps in side compression, or in a side chain though. So it's duplicating the signal and running that duplicate through the guitar amp. So it's not running the whole thing through the guitar amp. It's duplicating the signal and then running one of them through the amp. So that way you still have the clean part of it, so to speak. And also you have a little bit of dirtiness added on top of that. So without the amp, it sounds like this. And then with it, you get a nice dirty echo there. So yeah, there's the dulcimer sound. That's how we did that. And then we have a little call and response between the dulcimer and the music box. The music box is sort of fitting in the open space in between the dulcimer. As the dulcimer is holding that open notes, those open notes, we fill it in with the music box there. So it's sort of like a call and response. And then the same thing, etc. Then we go into this section. And on the keys, the heaven keys, I'm doing this back and forth. Again, that's an example of using the same plugin in a different way. And here we have this very old analog sounding pad. Just laying down some chords in sequence. And these are actually, oh wow, okay. One of them I know is, yes, it's this very old guy who made a lot of plugins that I have, GTG. They're actually very good, but they're very specific and very analog style, kind of. So I don't use them all too much, but they are very good for what they are, for the style that they attempt to do. So that's this one. And then we have another analog sounding pad from this plugin here. And again, I can't exactly tell you how much I've modified these things because I don't remember, but typically speaking, I always tweak them at least a little bit. It's just inevitable to, maybe the detune or reducing the echo or something. Like there's always some kind of tweaks that need to be done to fit your exact purpose. And probably maybe at least more than half of the time, I'm making very, very significant changes to what I'm starting with. So let's see. So in the next pattern here, we have, again, the same block chords, but then the dulcimers laying down a pattern over that. So yeah, and this whole piece is really written to sort of feel like constant motion. That was really the aim of this, is just to feel like, oh, I need to keep moving, you know, just to get that feeling of constantly rising expectations and, again, that never-ending to-do list. So keep the motion in there. And then we come back to the guitar melody, except this time played on the music box. We're peppering in some flute here. So this flute here, again, sort of intentionally crappy, but it's in the background, so it doesn't really matter. This is actually the same flute as we used all the way back here when we did the transition into the main beat. And now we're using it in this fashion. Yeah. And then we have the analog synth pad bringing us into the key change. And then we have some interesting colors here with the flute again. I'm playing this pad in the background. I've been doing this during the whole recording, but like when I'm trying to feature one instrument, instead of just playing just the flute here, when you hear that on its own, it sounds a little bit different than when you have the context of the chords behind it. It's almost like seeing like a bodiless head or something, you know. You're not seeing the framework of the chord that it's in reference to. So with this new key change, or it's not really a key change, but it's a key up away from the tonic, we get another dulcimer melody. The beat's still going. Dulcimer is one of my favorite instruments. It's just such a beautiful thing. I have to almost stop myself from using it on every single track that I write. Honestly, I love it that much. And then this goes back into the music box. Still keeping that same beat going, that same 6/5 pattern. And then here's the interlude. Back to the keys. And then here we have another upward flourish. And here we have a very weird sounding synth that I think this is a rare case where I only use a synth once in a song, I believe. This is sort of just a spacey thing that I just thought sounded kind of cool. and just it seemed to fit. I can't really come up with a relation to the theme for this one. This one I don't think was actually inspired with the theme. I think it just sounded cool on its own. It didn't really have its genesis from anything related to the theme. We have a little effect in the background here. Bringing back the guitar a little bit. So as we're ramping up, you can sort of tell we're ramping up to go back into the main section with the guitar. And because of that, I'm slowly bringing the guitar back. And then that goes right back into the... But before we continue, just point this out really quickly. I don't know if you can kind of hear that that's a variation on the original guitar melody from the beginning of the song. I don't know, can you hear that? I'll go back to it. You know, same basic, it's an homage to that, I guess. It's a nod to that. It's a reference. And then, yes, back into the main beat. This time without a variation. In the other songs, after the interlude, I would go back to the main beat, but I would do something different with the melody. But in this case, I just decided to go right back and actually repeat verbatim a section, almost. Because, normally, the percussion would stay the same. The percussion would be a repeat and the chords would be a repeat, but the melody would be different. It would be a variation on what it was the first time. But in this case, it was all the parts were exactly the same. And then here we go into a chord up. And then back into the end. Let's play this again with some more layers. On. And then back to these heaven keys again, doing this back and forth motion. And then you're not hearing because I'm not in the song mode, the correct mode here, but here's where the you can hear the shepherd's tone coming back in there. And then, yeah, that loops right back to the beginning. So there you have it. There's probably the strongest track in the game, I would say, probably. Let's take a look at, see if there's any interesting scrap. There's gotta be. Oh, yeah. Okay. 35. Oh, yeah, there's a couple, but not too many. just a little another arpeggio. That's sort of like Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies. Oh, here's an alternate beat. I never ended up using a straight 3/4 time signature anywhere, I don't think. I don't remember. And then there's a more hyper drum beat that clearly had no place in this song. So luckily I didn't use it. There's a scrap music box melody, that's okay. And there you have it, folks. There it is. Okay, next up we have Manipulation, World 5. And as you can guess, the theme of this world is about being manipulated by other people. Them trying to get you to do what their bidding, basically. And I believe I mentioned in the beginning, this is probably personally the one I have least experience with in my real life. I've been fortunate enough to be around good people that don't really try to manipulate me in any significant kind of way. But this is something that Zach felt that he had experienced a lot. So mechanically in this world, you control a voodoo ball, which you can sort of see here in the background. And anything that you do to the voodoo ball will also be done to the regular ball. And this is probably the coolest mechanic in terms of all the interesting level design opportunities it creates. If you play the game or if you want to watch someone else play it, take a look at World 5 because there's some really cool level designs based off of this mechanic. I really find it interesting. So yeah, musically, Manipulation, my first instinct is, wow, that's a very unsettling and twisted and Machiavellian kind of feeling. I wanted to go for something very unsettling and off-putting in the music as well. But I did have a little bit of trouble reconciling it with the background image that we had for this. And it was described to me as being a map because you're sort of looking down on the person almost like a marionette, as if the person was a puppet. You know, you have a full map of their head space or their life, and you're able to see the bird's eye view and sort of control it from there. But in terms of like the light coloredness of it, it sort of doesn't match with the music per se. But I think the music matches with the emotional content. And I think the visuals also match with the emotional content as well, just in their own way. But in this case, the triangle was kind of broken. You know, the center point of the emotional content was there, and then we had the music and the art going off from it, but the music and the art aren't necessarily connected to each other, sort of. But I think, you know, maybe I'm overthinking this a little bit. I think in the final game, it did seem fine to, you know, it seems perfectly natural, I think. So, okay, so we start off here with a piano, some piano chords, and you might notice that these are somewhat similar to the harp, the 3 harp chords in World 1, Isolation. At this point in development, I actually thought this was going to be the last world, so I was attempting to sort of tie the loose end back and make it, sort of bring it full circle by referencing that same structure of chords. I later found out that we were going to have a World 6. But yeah, at this time I was attempting to reference that and attempt to bring it full circle. So that's why it's sort of a similar format here. But instead of being a lonely tone, I've modified it to be a little bit more unsettling to match the idea of manipulation and underhandedness. And here we have an echoey, just a simple sine bell type of instrument. So this piece is in 5/4 all the way through, I believe. I don't think there's any part where it's not. And it is all based on this 5/4 loop. And this was actually one of the rare cases where I sort of take the percussion loop straight without chopping it up too much. Although I did make this, you can hear that this is swung, whereas I've made it into slightly faster and also straight on the beat, not swung. And then the ride beat that comes in here, this is another rare case where I'm taking the loop almost as it is, of course straightening it out a little bit. So that 5/4 loop right there was the basis of the rhythm for this whole track. And it happened to fit so nicely. I mean, it's just, all it is 2 measures of 5/8 fit into a full measure of 5/4, kind of. So in each measure of 5/4, it's split down the middle into 5/8. So it's like 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5. That's the subdivision of 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5. You know, so the subdivision is 5/8 within that, and you'll hear that in the snare and the bass that when it comes in the next section. And here we have most likely another omnisphere pad. Yep. And these are just some basic women's choir mixed with a lot of different other layers here, it looks like. Oh no, just one. Never mind. So we have that choir mixed with this, what they call the burning piano sound. It adds a little bit of deathly character to it. And again, a very, very dark sounding song, possibly more so than it needed to be. But it definitely does fit with the image of the voodoo ball, I think. I always liked that image. So here we have the main beat. So like I said, here's the 5/8 beat. And then over top of that, we're going to put the snare and the kick. 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5. So that is the basic format of the beat. So here's a little something that's underneath all of that when the beat first comes in. And this is actually if anyone can tell me what that's from, I'll give you a prize or something. That is a sample taken from an actual like popular artist, and it's just a very small snippet of the song, right at the end of the song. And I cut it up and made it into and looped it and turned it into a playable instrument, and it ended up working really well in this song, I think. And then you'll see a pretty cool use of it in a few patterns or so. And here we just have a little backing rhythm while the drums are still going. Okay, so here we go into the main melody of the song, or the first melody rather. Piano and flute doubled. Just a simple flute, just a regular flute. I'm using Vienna Instruments solo flute here, which is a beautiful legato sound. Again, with some reverb, as always. And then here's the interesting use of that vocal sample. X pattern. Yeah, I have to say, I do like that part. I like things like that. Just a very, I like the, shoot, I guess, is it an Arabic scale? I don't know. But I like that, whatever scale that is. And played in that arpeggiated style with an echo, with the panning, with a vocal sample that already has a very nice characteristic on its own. So we're kind of using that as a punctuation to these sentences here. So that where the piano and the flute are saying the sentence, and then that vocal sample is sort of the punctuation. Right? The sentence and then the punctuation. And then we go into a B section after that, with just another simple arpeggiation reminiscent of World 1 on this sine bell here. And then adding some pads the second time around. And then we're going up. And yeah, the beat underneath it stays the same the whole time. And then back down. And then here we go into the interlude. And then we drop back down to just this groove here. And this loop right here, I don't know why I changed it. Maybe I have it. Oh yes, I did. I called it paper beat. So this appeared in the beginning of the song as well, if you didn't notice. This was right in the beginning. And I don't know why, as soon as I put that into the project file, even before it had the effects on it, it sounded like paper to me a little bit. I don't know why. It sounded like paper ripping. So I put it through these effects. I put it through the guitar rig, and I don't remember all the specifics of this, but I do remember that I put it through this guitar amp to get some distortion on there, and these other filters. And the end result of it is what I call the paper beat. That's what I named it in the mixer. And it just sounded like that to me. And obviously, you know, visually it matches up with the graph paper style of the levels. So I don't know, I just thought that was an immediate connection when I heard it. And seeing it in action in the level, it sort of fit. It fit for me. And then here we go into a very bizarre So this is just a basic synth, really, but it's being routed through these multiple delay filters, multiple echo filters for the layman. And without those, it would just sound like... very harsh, obviously, and a lot less mystical. That sort of gives it a very weird, unsettling quality that we're going for. And then the sine bell here complementing it. And then going back down in chord to be prepared for going back into the main section again. We have some weird, I believe his name is Darumalia, a very old website that I found that was giving away free samples, and I think it was Darumalia, I believe it's an Indian name, and he had a lot of interesting sound effects that he gave away for free. This was a long time ago. I'm sure you can still find them somewhere. So yeah, I do enjoy crafting these elaborate reverses. That's always fun. And again, another arpeggiated section, this time two going at once playing different melodies. And then we finish it off with this vocal synth that was previously used to do those runs, those upward runs, is now being used in this fashion of just hitting these chords repeatedly. So again, yeah, using the same instrument in a different way later in the song, sort of my technique that I enjoy doing because, you know, it adds a little bit of variety too. Not saying it's the only way to do it, of course. People make brilliant productions without doing that, and maybe you could even say it's lazy too. But I do like the minimalism of it, and I don't know. It keeps the cast of characters in the song down to a manageable level in my ear. Like, I know I don't like plays or books that introduce too many characters. It always feels just like adding characters for the sake of characters and to fill in space. Whereas I would rather see more interesting things happen with fewer characters than see more characters doing less stuff, I guess. That's just sort of what I prefer, you know. So nothing wrong with that. Either way that you prefer it. But that is my technique, and it might even come out of I've been doing this so long. The software back in the day used to be a lot worse, and it would crash a lot. So perhaps I got into a habit of using the fewest instruments I could, and maybe that's where it comes from. Maybe it's more of a practical reason, and I just can't get out of the habit now. Who knows? And there's really nothing much more interesting about this. It's just holding these pad notes again, and then looping back to the start. So that is it for manipulation. Let's see if we have anything in the way of scrap. So, you know, it's funny, when I hear these scrap pieces, I can usually tell pretty much exactly where they were supposed to go, but that got rejected. I sort of have this kind of musical, I don't want to call it shorthand, but it's just that if I have an idea, I can write it down in its most bare, minimal form like this, and I could listen to it a year later and I'll still remember what the full idea was supposed to be. I'm still able to extrapolate it just from that small part, which is why I can't really show people my sketches sometimes, because my sketches are sometimes as bare as this, but yet myself listening back to it, I know I would know how to fill in all the details to make it into the full song, but no one else is really going to hear that because it's my own shorthand. But this was supposed to go right at the beat, and this is not just me remembering it because I have horrible remembering. I have horrible memory. This was clearly supposed to go here. And it sounds okay, but I opted for this instead, which is just simpler and dumber, kind of, but I think it fits better in that particular case. Anyway, here's another one. So this is scrap, but it's a full percussion in there too, but all I can hear is that the bass is different. Right, so, yeah. Oh wow, what the hell is that? That's like a draconian gothic kind of thing. Yeah, that doesn't belong anywhere in there. Yeah, so there's a good reason these things are not included. I have them as fleeting related thoughts, and I write them down just for the hell of it, but they don't end up getting used, and for a good reason. So anyway, that was manipulation. Okay, so here we are at World 6, Acceptance. So all the previous worlds have been our struggles, in the day of the life of a game dev, and this is where it all comes to a head. Finally accepting all the chaos that's been going on around you and forming some sort of sense of closure and dealing with the problems and accepting them and moving forward with them. So this world mechanically is a combination of all the worlds before it. It combines all the different game mechanics, both the physics, the ball physics, and the world physics as well. And it combines them all into like these seamless levels that are sort of a test of everything you've learned up until this point, a combination of all of it. So, in that same vein, the music is also a combination of all the worlds before it. So let's dive right in. The first thing that we're going to have is to load the right project and not load the same stupid project over. Okay, we now have the correct project loaded, and the birds are outside chirping. The rain has stopped, luckily. So yeah, the first interesting thing about this piece is that it starts with a mashup of all the previous worlds, and you wouldn't be able to recognize it as a mashup. This is just a behind-the-scenes thing that only I would know until I'm telling you right now. This rush in the beginning that starts the piece is actually all of the other worlds overlaid on top of each other, sped up, blurred a little bit, and then, crescendoed upward. So again, as I was describing, this is sort of everything coming to a head at the end here, and it's a sort of a very climactic moment, and so a crescendo felt very appropriate, and that mashup idea came very naturally. It's like, okay, everything is being combined here, and it's finally reaching a breaking point, kind of just falling into acceptance of it, right? So we have this big build up, and then just sort of we have this big build up, and then we quickly cut and fall right into the beginning of the piece. So let's take a look at the effects for this. We just have some basic EQ here, but here is the filtering that's going on to create that widening effect, for lack of a better word. And that's really all there is to that I can show anyway for now. Alright, so first we go into this part here, which hopefully you should recognize as yet again the same isolation harp part, except played on an E-piano. So again, this is going to reference all of the past worlds, just like the mechanics do, and we're starting off with World 1 by mirroring the harp part with the E-piano part. And we have a little hollow pad here. Again, this Zeta plugin, which I've found a lot of use in this particular project with. And underneath here we have a very subtle shimmering effect that is an arpeggiated marimba sample put through just a lot of effects here that I'm not going to go through because you can barely hear it anyway. So another big part of this song that I knew I wanted to do was I wanted to have a contrast between chaos and calm. And this is actually something we talked about with the team. It was sort of, the tentative title was Acceptance and Closure. Just like self-destruction and apathy is World 3, this was supposed to be acceptance, chaos, and closure. So I wanted to create this contrast between chaos and closure, and the way I had envisioned that was having sort of frantic percussion over top a very elongated and calm background choir and pad sort of bedrock. So this is what I ended up doing. We have this frantic percussion on top. That's sort of the voice of the chaos. And then underneath we just have these slow block chords over top this frantic. Right, so it's sort of a contrast there. And then here I felt the piano, that sort of just came naturally as a tempo. It's almost like a metronome or a countdown or something like that of, reaching the breaking point. And then finally we go into the main beat here, where we have this ride part, which by the way sounds like this unchopped. And then chopped it sounds like. So you can kind of hear the beat that's supposed to be there just from that. Even though the snare isn't there yet, you can kind of hear where it's supposed to go. And then we add the snare in. And then here's a fairly beefy kick and snare layers. 4. I don't usually use 4. Some crashes. So here, hopefully you'll recognize this as the main piano melody from World 1, except that it has a little bit more finality to it. Yeah, so I tried to create a little bit more final sounding variations of the other melodies in the other worlds by moving them up or down a step, usually. And here, on the second repeat of this piano melody, I'm bringing in the Celesta that was in Denial, World 2. And I'm also bringing back in this cool pad in World 1, except using it in a much lower register. The pad that I found very haunting in World 1. And then here in this next section, hopefully you can recognize that from World 3. And also the melody as well, but again, some of these notes modified to sound a little bit more final. And I realize that's sort of a nebulous term to use, but that's sort of the only word there is for it. We have little bells in the background here. Here's just a transition into the interlude section of the song. And we're using a different drum loop here. Again, chopped up a little bit. With some pads that I've already been using in the past in this song. Just holding down some different chords, moving through some different chords. Something about that sound mixed with that chord choice, you know, that particular plugin and the way that patch is designed with that specific chord sounds very final, hollow. Sort of indescribable, but it seems very fitting for the end mood. And here, bringing in the flute from Manipulation, World 5. And a little bit of the guitar from Expectations. And then oh, I'm sorry, I missed this part. Also bringing in the music box from Expectations as well, before there. And then there we go with the Rise Again. I believe that is the use of the mashup, yes. So that's the same mashup from the beginning. Pitched a little bit differently, but the same concept. Again, all those songs combined into that one sample. And then we go, boom, right back into the main section. And then we go... We have a little lead in with the broken lead. And this is a melody from World 1 again. Again, modified to be more final. Actually, no, that one is not modified. I'm sorry, that one remained the same from World 1. I believe. And then here we have the climax. We're using the same violin spiccato melody as before, or riff I should say, except over different chords. And here's where everything comes to a head in the whole song. And then boom, we fall right back into this. And this riff didn't appear anywhere else in the song. And I can't explain this one, to be honest. This piano over that beat. It just felt right. I can't explain it. It didn't. That melody and even that rhythm didn't appear anywhere else in the song. And normally I like to close things out with like a reference to a previous rhythm at least, even if it's over a different chord or a different melody. But that, I don't believe it was anywhere else, but it couldn't be anything else. I can't explain it, but that was just what was right. And then there we go, we fade back out into nothing. These are just alternate melodies that I never used. And that's it. There's not much scrap for this one. This was very, very much a combination of all the other world musics, and just very much a mashup of them, and based heavily on them, and trying to incorporate them all evenly together into a cohesive whole, and sort of just synthesizing them all together into one kind of unit. And this is probably my second favorite track in the album, right after Expectations. I just think it ended up working out pretty well. And I actually wrote a lot of this song, maybe half of it, about a month or two after I wrote the last track that I worked on before that, which was Manipulation. So there was a big gap in between, and I came back to this much later on. And I was a little bit worried that I wouldn't be able to write in the same style. I mean, you can kind of hear that slightly different, perhaps, maybe in the production, if you listen really close to the mixing. But overall, that long gap between writing for this particular soundtrack turned out to be a good thing, I think, because in this very particular case, I was sort of remixing. This track was supposed to be a remix of all the other ones, almost. So I almost think that the gap in time was appropriate in this particular case. So I guess this kind of worked out. All right, so the last track we have is the credits, and then that's it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is the last one. This is the credits theme, and this was actually the first one I wrote. I think I mentioned this at the beginning. This was actually the first piece I wrote for the soundtrack. And this was before I had really nailed down the exact sound that we wanted for the soundtrack. Even once we knew that we wanted new jazz, there's certainly many variations of style within that genre. So we had to nail down exactly which one, and this was before that. So this was originally written as the World 1 theme, so you will hear vibes of sort of isolation in there and loneliness. Like, for example, it starts off with this flute here, this bending flute, echoing flute. And I believe that was what came to mind when I saw the Crystal Mountain yellow background from Felipe. It just sort of reminded me of a lonely kind of desert or something. That was the imagery that came to mind, and the flute came out of that. The echoing, bending flute. And then there was this very lovely alchemy patch of white noise / vinyl hiss, which is very common in new jazz. And it just sounded very fitting for an opening, accompanying the very first image you see of actual gameplay. But yeah, it also ended up being very appropriate to end the game too, because as I said, this was before I really nailed down the style, and you can sort of feel that it's a little bit stylistically different than the other tracks, which ends up being appropriate for the credits because it's not a typical song. It doesn't fit into the same format as the world music does. But so yeah, we start off with this vinyl hiss, and I think I added some panning effects to it. Yeah, that's what it sounds like without the effects. I add some pan and a little bit of a filter and compression there. And some felt piano there, which is just a very soft piano library. And then we go. And let's take a look at the percussion here, because the percussion here, instead of being a recorded loop, it's actually alchemy percussion. Yeah, so that's a bit different than all the other ones. And we have this interesting rising and falling sample here. Made up of those two layers. And here's something interesting that I wanted to talk about. So you can hear that this is right before the beat drops. This is the build up. You can hear that in the background, you hear this. So this arpeggiating organ part here, this was actually supposed to be a dynamic music integration into the whole game. What we were going to do if we had time, which we didn't end up having time, but we were going to put something like this layer throughout the whole soundtrack for every world level, anyway, for every world track. And what it would be is it would always be there playing alongside the world music silently. However, whenever the ball got close to the goal, this would slowly fade in and fade out. So it would be, it's basically a dynamic music. It would be playing there as a separate layer, but silent, and it would only fade in when the ball got close to the goal, and it would be sort of an auditory feedback of success. In games, when you're designing games, you want to give the player certain forms of feedback, And this is just one form of embellished feedback, that adds a nice touch on top of the game, but we were never able to do it. But I always liked the sound of these particular chords and those particular instruments. So I originally wasn't going to have this in the album version because it never got implemented in the game. However, like at the last second, I decided to add it in just this one spot. Just that one spot, I faded in those organs, just because I liked them too much. So originally, without it, it was just... It was just that string rise, which sounds cool on its own. But I had to add that. I had to add in a reference to that somewhere, so I did, because I just liked it too much. And then, so here we go into the main beat. Let's take a look at that. Slowly adding layers here. I'll slowly take them away, I guess. Anyway, here's the main melody here. This is a hammered piano, as you can see. And this is going through some interesting effects here. This is going through an interesting effect called metallurgy. And I can't explain to you what this does because honestly I do not know. But I messed around with it a little bit and that sound came out and it sounded really cool. So I went with it. Oh, yeah, so the part of the sound that plugin is making is all that cool reverb effect. It's sort of like a reverb delay, but also with an undulating filter on it. And then the rest of these things are just, EQs and compression and all that, or saturation rather. And here's a whistling sample with a little bit of glide. You can hear the glide in between the notes if I turn it off. Sounds a little bit stiff, but with it on. Yeah. And that's really it for this. And there we have it. We have those falling piano lines that sort of, for some reason, sound like credits to me. It sounds like the end of a game. It sounds like the closing of a chapter. I realized I missed a golden opportunity to name this track the epilogue and name the menu music the foreword, but instead I just boringly called them introduction and conclusion. So this whole game and the way I named the tracks on the soundtrack was based on the concept of this game being a book. So the title of the book would be Hacky Zack, which is the first track on the soundtrack, which is the trailer music. And then the menu music would be the foreword or the introduction or the prologue. And then all the chapters would be World 1 through 6. Isolation, denial, self-destruction, expectations, manipulation, acceptance. And then finally the conclusion with the credits. And that is the book of Zack. Hacky Zack. Anyway, guys, that's it for me. This has been incredibly long. I am sorry for talking so long. If you are still watching, thank you so much. And also, I'm a little bit concerned. I don't know what to think about that. Like I said, this is very interesting to me when I'm watching other composers do it, because it's always fascinating for me to see how other composers think and how they work. So I hope at the very least this was somewhat interesting or insightful or even entertaining, although I'm not sure about that part. Maybe at the very least it helped you fall asleep tonight. So thank you very much for watching. If you want to see more of this stuff in the future for other work that I've done, just I guess let me know on Twitter, email, or in the comments. Take care.